My father, even after having cheated on my mother and further breaking the family by becoming a raging alcoholic, said he was so excited to be able to walk me down the aisle at my wedding, and when he called me an ungrateful brat for refusing, I absolutely lost it on him. Posted by you/NoLong254. Throwaway account because my family knows my name. As the title says, I, 24F, snapped at a family dinner and told my father, 56M, that I'd rather let a stranger walk me down the aisle than him. For a bit of context, my father always wanted my brother and me to have a traditional wedding. Since I was a child, he always told me how much he looked forward to eventually walking me down the aisle, and I, too, shared his excitement. However, that changed the day I found out he had cheated on my mother. The affair was a one-time thing, however, he kept in contact with a woman for over a year before my mother caught him. This completely changed my view of him, and although my mother decided to forgive him, his behavior after the fact only made me detest him more. He became more aggressive, would often turn to alcohol, and basically became a stranger. He only got worse when I entered my teens, and now that I am in my 20s and have put more thought into my future marriage, I know for a fact I do not want him walking me down the aisle, even though I know how much this will hurt him. Instead, both my brother and I agreed that he'd be the one walking me down the aisle, as he was the father figure while I was growing up. Now here is where the problem began. I no longer speak much to my father, however, every year or so, my mother hosts a family dinner. Since they are still together, my father is always at these events. Unfortunately, he often uses them to get drunk and complain about how upsetting it is that we no longer speak to him. The only reason I keep coming to these dinners is because I love my mother and do not want to make her feel like I am abandoning her. I have tried to organize outings with just my mother, however, my father always strong-arms his way into these meetings, and in my opinion, it isn't worth the fight. However, yesterday, I just snapped. During the dinner, the topic of marriage was brought up. My brother recently proposed to his fiancée and was talking with my mother about some of their wedding plans. My father, who was already drunk, piped up about how much he was looking forward to walking me down the aisle when I eventually got married. I immediately apologized and told him that I had already decided my brother was actually going to be the one to walk me down the aisle. I added that, instead of me, he could walk my mother down the aisle before I entered so that he could still have his moment. After a long pause from him, my father started yelling. He told me I was an ungrateful brat and that he couldn't believe this was how I repaid him after all he had done for me growing up. I remained silent while he went off on me, but after he told me I should be lucky he even still wanted to walk me down the aisle after how I treated him, I just snapped. I told him that I would rather a stranger walk me down the aisle than him, and he'd be lucky if he was even invited to the wedding. I know my wording was harsh, but I was just sick of him berating me. Once I had finished yelling, my father broke down and started sobbing. He kept repeating that I was such a bad person for taking this from him, and how could I do this to him after everything? I couldn't handle staying there, so I left the dinner shortly after. Today, I was bombarded with texts from my mother about how I shouldn't have said those things, that I know how my father is and what alcohol does to him, and that I should have just remained quiet. My brother is on my side, but I know my mother is right. I have experienced my father under the influence and know that the best way to handle it is to stay silent. Still, when he said those things about me, I just couldn't stop myself. So, was I the jerk for telling my father I'd rather let a stranger walk me down the aisle and that he'd be lucky if he was even invited to the wedding? /relevant comments. Commenter. Not the jerk. Your father is a selfish drunk, and it doesn't seem like he ever really suffered any consequences from his affair or any of his actions afterward. Your mom defends him, which is classic codependency behavior. It also seems like your dad became abusive as time went on. I think that if your dad is anywhere near your wedding, a wedding dinner, or a wedding reception, he is going to be trouble and is going to mar your memories of the best event of your life. Ops response. I appreciate your verdict. I know it seems obvious that I should cut contact, but I just want to keep the peace in my family and really don't want to lose my mother after all that she has done for me, even if she defends my father. My father struggled with a nicotine addiction while we were children, and he fixed it by turning to alcohol. He did enter rehab for a while, and that is where he met his affair partner. When he was caught, he relapsed. We were told to just move past the whole affair, and if we brought it up, my father would either start sobbing or get aggressive. My mother is entirely financially dependent on my father, and although she has always denied it, I sometimes think that is the only reason she stayed. Regarding the abuse, my father never really physically harmed my brother or me. He would, when he was already really drunk, slap us, but my mother always managed to stop him, so it never got truly bad. Although, and I don't know if this counts as verbal or any other form of abuse, he would often drive dangerously when we angered him in a car, complain about our attitudes, or yell at us, mainly when drunk. He also kicked my brother out at 16 and me when I had just turned 17. These are just a few things I can recall off the top of my head, but I'm sure my brother has other stories from the time we were living with him. Commenter 2. Your father is an abusive drunk, and your mother is both enabling him and allowing him to abuse her children. I understand you love your mother, but she's clearly choosing to support his verbal and emotional abuse of you for whatever reason. I can't tell you what you should do, only that if it were me, I would tell them both the above, word for word, and then block them until they decided to grow up. Ops response. Sorry about the deleted comment. I believe Reddit glitched, and it looked as though I had replied twice. As to what I had said in the original comment, I know my mother is painted in a poor light in this interaction, but when we were teens, she would protect us whenever he got physical and would defend us when he entered our rooms at midnight just to scream. She has always been my support system alongside my brother, and I don't know what I would do without her in my life. I don't know what she has to put up with now that we are out of the house. A lot of comments are saying I need to cut her out as well, but then I don't know how I'll be able to make sure she is safe and taken care of. Commenter 3. I grew up with an alcoholic father, and that is no excuse for his behavior or lashing out. He screwed up so badly over so many years. Your father needs to get his act together, and he is not owed anything by you or your brother. Ops response. My brother and I tried to convince him, when he was sober, to consider rehab. My mother doesn't want him to go because that is where he met his affair partner, and he doesn't want to go either, as he claims it didn't help him the first time. I often find myself considering just cutting him out of my life, but then I have no way of knowing if my mother is safe. I don't trust my father with her. Op tries to defend her mother's actions for staying with her father. I understand. Maybe I'm overly justifying my mother's actions, but I still don't see her as an enabler. I may be naive, but I still think she was just too scared to leave my father, as she had no family in our country and was dependent on him financially. Update 2 days later. It has been about 2 days since I told my alcoholic father he wouldn't be the one walking me down the aisle, and since then, things have only gotten worse for my brother and me. Reading all of the comments helped me realize that my mother, although she shielded us from most of the abuse, was still an enabler and showed no signs of ever stopping my father's behavior. However, she is still my mother, and I didn't want to immediately jump to no contact. I talked it over with my brother, and we decided it would be best to have a final conversation with my mother alone. I finally answered her text, basically telling her we needed to talk without my father present, and that if he did show up, I'd leave and have to consider going no contact. She agreed to the arrangement, and we decided to meet at a nearby cafe for lunch, at my request. I arrived first, and my mother came about 15 minutes later with, you likely guessed it, my father in tow. Maybe I was still naive to think she would follow through on our agreement, but I had truly trusted her to come alone. I just got up and left the cafe. Although it was hard, I followed through on my threat and blocked her on everything. I thought that would be the end of it. However, this morning, she showed up at my doorstep, this time without my father. She looked so disheveled and just so lost. I couldn't close the door on her, so I invited her in. We had a long talk. I told her about how much hurt her behavior has caused my brother and me, how my father would still be cut out of our lives until he was at least a year sober, and that she needed to finally start encouraging him to better himself or leave him. Otherwise, we'd also be going no contact with her. I told her that if she did ultimately decide to divorce him, both my brother and I would be there to support her financially and emotionally. We ended up talking for about 2 hours, the majority of which was spent mostly crying. During the talk, my mother revealed the real reason she wouldn't leave my father. She was the one who had an affair first. It was with a co-worker at her old waitressing job. Instead of dumping her, my father told her they could stay together if she would follow his rules. Basically, he was allowed to have at least one hall pass, she couldn't talk to anyone of the opposite gender, and she had to quit her job and give him full access to her finances. If she broke any one of his rules or tried to leave, he'd tell her family, who were extremely against cheating, what my mother had done and do everything in his power to ruin her life. After she finished, I tried again to convince her to leave him, telling her she'd still have my brother and me. The revelation that my mother also cheated has hurt me deeply, but at the moment I still just want her to leave my father. However, despite my best efforts, my mother apologized for everything she had done to us but still said she was going to stay with my father. I have now lost both of my parents and have been a sobbing wreck all day. It's not what I wanted from this situation, but at least I still have my brother. Hopefully, I will eventually be able to move on, but for now, I think I just want to rest. Sorry if there are any grammar mistakes. I just needed to vent about what has been going on. Thank you for all of your support. Thanks. /relevant comments. Commenter. I'm glad you were finally able to see that your mother was enabling and that you held your boundaries but also got a chance to talk to your mom. Gently, though, you can't control your mom. To give her an ultimatum like that is ultimately the same thing as what your father has done to her. I don't condone what either has done, and maybe no contact is still the right thing to do, but I stand by my suggestion to get yourself to therapy, ideally before getting married, as these behaviors trickle down, whether you want them to or not. Ops response. Thank you for your comment. I have a therapy session booked later this week. I have no intention of becoming like my father and will do whatever I can to ensure I do not end up repeating his behavior. I let my emotions get the better of me in the way I handled things with my mother, which is no excuse, but hopefully, I'll be able to stop this behavior from continuing to show up in my life. Op clarifies details on her mother's affair and who cheated first. I believe that my mother's affair came out during a visit while my father was in rehab. When he asked for a hall pass, he already knew who he wanted to have a one-night stand with. My mother agreed to only a one-night stand, as that is what she did, and that is why, when it was revealed he kept in contact with his affair partner, I'm not sure if they ever slept together again, she got upset. My father had already started to drink alcohol every couple of nights after he got out of rehab, likely due to my mother's affair, but I believe the way we treated him once we found out made him turn solely to alcohol for comfort. I do not support my mother in her decision to have an affair, and my view of her has changed drastically. However, whether she cheated or not, she is still in a dangerous situation with my father, and making sure she is safe should take priority over my feelings. I also still remember all of the good years I spent with my mother after the cheating incident, and even though it's likely only that way because she was never outed, I can't help but associate her with those memories, whereas my father is associated with his alcoholism, as that is all I can remember of him. Op adds an edit to her post. Since I've gotten a lot of comments about the fact that it seems I am perfectly fine with my mother's affair, I would quickly like to clear some things up. I am by no means siding with my mother or defending her for her affair. I just wanted her out of the toxic marriage, which is toxic on both sides, but she is an adult, and ultimately, she chose to stay in it. All I will do now is try to ensure I do not become like them and hope that they both get the help they need. I still do not like my father, as he was abusive to us, however, I am now also aware that my mother isn't much better. I feel sympathy for both of them due to their situations but don't agree with either of their actions. While I was writing out this post, I had no idea how much her affair actually affected my family's life and my father's later behavior. Reading the comments helped me realize the extent of how horrible her actions were, and I am by no means defending or supporting that. I will need a moment to adjust to this information, as I now have a new perspective on the years I spent believing my father was the villain while my mother was the hero, so please bear with me while I take it in. Also, I have told my brother everything, and he, too, is looking into therapy to help him move forward. Anyways, I hope this clarifies some things, and I'll answer any questions in the comments. Op adds a second edit to her post. Sorry if it wasn't clear, I have gone full no contact with both of my parents.